This episode of Heavy Cardboard is brought to you by BoardGameTables.com. Without question, Chad and his folks go the extra mile to ensure that not only are you getting an amazing quality board game table, but that the entire process is as smooth as a warm knife through butter. So, if you're interested, considering, or in the market for a new centerpiece for your game room, head on over to BoardGameTables.com and customize your dream table. Oh, and mention Heavy Cardboard when you do.
Heavy Cardboard, Episode 73, An Infamous Interview. Coming to you from inside the literary mind of a would-be opium trafficker, welcome to Heavy Cardboard, where we talk medium and heavy strategy board games, war games, 18xx, and occasionally sit down to chat with some fascinating board game designers. We're your hosts. I'm Edward.
And I'm Amanda.
You know, I came to the realization earlier today that I don't think we thank our listeners enough for, listening. So thank you, all y'all that have been around, this whole time. And for those that are newer, obviously, welcome to you as well.
Absolutely.
And for all the new listeners, welcome and hope you enjoy the show. I think it's safe to say that we hope that we make y'all's commute or chores around the house or workouts or whatever it is that y'all do while listening to us a little bit easier, a little bit better. So seriously, truly, thanks y'all for listening.
Thank you so much.
Today's been a day of realizations because I had another one today. That either after HeavyCon or after WBC, I may not have a job. After that, I really think that I'm going to be unemployed after one of those two conventions, which it's kind of scary, but at the same time, a lot freeing at the same time. I mean, let's face it, I'm in a job I hate. I'm not doing anything close to what it is I'm supposed to be doing in my job.
Right. And
there's no hope for improvement the rest of this calendar year. So I don't know that it would be the worst thing in a world, but at the same time, it's still the unknown.
It's still scary.
It is. And in case y'all don't know, the reason, it's from paid time or unpaid time off. Even though we have nothing going on at my job. Right. And I haven't done my job in over 4 months. I've been a warehouse worker, basically. You would think taking unpaid time off would be a good thing, but the way they see it is, hey, we're paying for your insurance and all that. You should be here working.
Yeah, but if you're not doing anything,
well, we're kidding parts, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing.
No, you're being paid a lot of money to do, something that's not worth that much money.
Fair point. So you would think they would welcome me. No, really, exactly. Take as much time as you need.
Scurry, go.
Right. But I don't think it's going to play out that way. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Whee! So we're in the studio again, obviously. It's in really good shape now that we have the desktop built and everything ready for the live stream tonight. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
A little nervous about it because it's like the unveiling of a new edition of a game. We've never done that before. No. So that's pretty exciting, which kind of is a
stepping
lead up.
Stone,
a lead up. Now, not to sell Three Kingdoms Redux short by any means. I mean, it's one of our favorite games and arguably our all-time favorite 3-player game.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we also have a couple more coming up later on this week that are a big deal as well, which are the 2 brass unveilings as well. Right. So looking forward to all 3 of these. I'm comfortable in this room, in the studio now.
That's good.
We have a lot of room to walk around the table for everybody. Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. So if y'all, obviously by the time y'all hear this, TKR will have already been done and possibly the first brass, Lancashire.
Say it really fast.
I've been told that's how you pronounce it. Just say it really fast.
Lancashire.
Yeah, right. And take out half the vowels, half the...
Lancashire.
Right, there you go.
Birmingham.
Perfect, done it.
HeavyCon prep is a hair overwhelming.
Yeah, a little bit. It definitely, and it's it slowly ramps up as HeavyCon builds.
Yeah.
As far as how many people are attending this year, we have almost 100 coming. Really excited about it. But, I'll be honest, we're on schedule for everything. Like, we're not like, oh, no, we have to rush to do this.
Right. But still, it's still a lot that has to get done. And yeah, we're on schedule, but still.
And it's only a few weeps away. So as it gets closer, I get more and more nervous. Like, oh, we haven't done this or that.
Right.
Like, wait, no, it's on the schedule. Relax. Chill out. Meeple Source has a Kickstarter going, and they're asking for input from folks who have experience with the second edition of Indonesia, who would want to enhance their copies and trick them out with some of the Meeple Source resources, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's something that interests you, go holler at them. They are asking for input, and we told them we would mention it to them. Or, well, not really to them, because they know it's more to y'all.
We told them we would mention it to y'all.
Yeah, there you go. Go with that. So live streams. We talked about, obviously, TKR tonight, or as y'all are hearing this, last night.
Right.
Brass on Thursday. Lancashire on Thursday. Brass Birmingham on Sunday. And then next week, it looks like some mix of Terraforming Mars, the upcoming Martin Wallace game, MOA, a yet-to-be-determined Age of Steam map, because people are like, yeah, you should play more of those. So you know what we're going to do? Yeah, we're going to play more of those. And 2016 Golden Elephant Award Finalist, Tramways.
Whoop, whoop.
Yes, we have 2 videos of Tramways already done, but you know what we don't have?
A good quality one.
Or at least as good as what everything else is in the new studio. So we're gonna do that justice and also play through that, reteach it, etc. I'm sure folks are like, wait, where's PAX Ren and Millennium Blades and 1822 and the Colonists? They're all coming in the next couple weeks. We promise. We haven't forgot about them.
No,
promise.
Not at all.
All of the ways to contact us are on our website, heavycardboard.com, and we rely on the generous support from our patrons over on patreon.com. If you'd like to join the community, check us out, patreon.com/heavycardboard. I know that we've mentioned in the last few episodes about Game Surplus's new site, gamesurplus.com. Big shock there, I understand. Wanted to mention it again, though. Solid prices, free shipping at $90, and truly, honest to goodness, the very best customer service in the hobby. They have PAX Renaissance in stock for $30, Trick of the Rails for $20. They have A Distant Plane, 1846, and just a ton of other games. So go check them out over at gamesurplus.com. Mention Heavy Cardboard when you do. And something else to keep in mind. Convention season's just around the corner. Here we are talking about HeavyCon and getting ready for that. Get ready for all the amazing imports that they're going to be bringing in quick, fast, and in a hurry after all these conventions. So keep an eye out, gamesurplus.com.
Okay, so originally, this episode was going to be a review of An Infamous Traffic.
Right.
With just a little bit of an interview with Cole Wehrle, the designer and artist behind the game.
Right. I asked Cole, who's a buddy of ours.
Right.
Hey, would you be interested in sitting down for a quick little, 20, 30-minute interview or so to pair it up with our review of An Infamous Traffic? He's like, yeah, that'd be cool. So we set it up for Monday. Everything's cool. Good to go. He borrowed some equipment from his audio department.
I think he teaches at UT. I'm not sure. I know he teaches in Austin, so I'm assuming it's UT. And
so he borrowed some recording equipment.
Right.
He's like, hey, I'll record my side. I was like, awesome, good deal, cool. An hour and a half later,
right,
we finished up, and I realized that, I really think that should air by itself.
And I agreed after I listened to it. Absolutely, it should air by itself.
So that's kind of what it is, what we're going to do. So hope you all enjoy it as much as I did sitting down and chatting with Cole.
And as much as I did editing it. It's amazing.
So enjoy the conversation, y'all. All right, I'm pleased to be joined by Cole Wehrle, designer of the 2016 Golden Elephant Award nominated game An Infamous Traffic, published by Hollandspiele, as well as PAX Premier, published by Sierra Madre Games, and the upcoming John Company, also published by Sierra Madre Games. So thanks for taking the time today, Cole. I appreciate it.
No problem, Edward. It's my pleasure.
All right. So first off, a little background on like how you and I know each other. We started out on Board Game Geek being members of the same Geek Chat League, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the GCL Gelato, I think I got asked to join it by Marco, who does the video game, the war game reviews. And I had known him from Bloomington, and it must have been 2011 or something. But I think that was the beginning of my a more serious entry to the hobby. There was just something about having to account for my plays every week that just got me thinking about games. I don't know. I think it might have played an outsized role.
That's really, really interesting. Now, Roger, who's the leader of the Geek Chat League, the Gelato, he invited me, and this is far before heavy cardboard ever became a thing. I was just random guy who, hey, can I be part of the cool kid club? And that was a few years ago, and then you and I ran into each other during meetups at BGG Con, and here we are. Now I have a podcast and YouTube channel, and you're a big, fancy, big-time designer now. Look at you go.
Yeah, look at us. It's great things are started there.
Yeah, pretty crazy. So first off, tell folks a bit about your background and how you basically grew up kind of in the hobby, though, really?
Yeah, I think a lot of people in this hobby get started in their 20s and 30s, and maybe, even older. And games were just part of life growing up. I grew up in a family where play was important. My parents played with us constantly as we were growing up, and it was hockey when it was sunny outside, and then we'd come inside and we'd play Risk and chess and euchre and just all kinds of games. And there were a couple things. When I was in middle school, I had an uncle who's an engineer up in Wisconsin, and when he was a kid, he loved Avalon Hill games, but was very much from a generation of people who put away their childish things at a certain point. And they were in a box, and there was one day he came down. He was visiting us while he was traveling through the Midwest, and he just sort of dropped off a box of old war games. So here I was.
Must be nice.
Yeah, here I was in 6th grade with a copy of Third Reich and Squad Leader. What else? Chancellorsville, Tactics 2. I think I was going through a little bit of a stint. I was playing some miniatures games, but when you're a kid, miniatures games are hard because they are. You want them all the more, but you just cannot afford that hobby. So the idea that I could break out a game of Tactics 2.
That's a dark, deep hole.
Oh, and you just, I feel like I must have been pushing it on my friends because I must have gotten a dozen people in pyramid scheme fashion to buy into Warhammer. But if you got behind it, we would play these funny little 500-point engagements just because they were so cheap that everybody could participate. But when I got those war games, we could kind of divide up our Tactics 2 counters as if they were, as if they were armies in Warhammer, and build our little armies and kind of, play against each other. And, it was around that same time that I got Catan. And so my middle school years were really marked by making up rules to Avalon Hill games and playing Battle Cry and Catan. Those are kind of that's what I was doing on rainy days in 7th grade.
I'll be honest. At least for me, I stopped playing board games, I'd say probably after grade school, and then forgot that the hobby even existed. Like, I didn't know there was a hobby that existed. And so, yeah, that's amazing to hear. And that's awesome that your parents promoted that type of environment.
Well, and a lot of it was happenstance too. I had a friend, I don't think I've ever told this to anybody, but I had a friend named Tony Hollibird whose grandfather would send him games on his birthday. And they were games like Puerto Rico, like right when Puerto Rico came out. So I don't know the year Puerto Rico came out. I assume it was 2000, 2001 maybe, because I would have been in 8th grade or high school. And he was like, hey, I got this game from my grandfather. It's weird. I don't know what to do with it. You have to understand I was an immature kid like everybody else. And so I remember when I learned, I got a copy of Diplomacy to Grod Sale, and I hated it because there could only be one army in every province. And that felt like so silly. Like, of course you can have 2 armies in a province. It's a huge amount of territory. And so we did that and broke the game. It just doesn't work. And I
Who'd
remember
have thought that, all their, obviously 8th grade Cole knew better, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, better than Kallheimer or whatever his name is. And it's funny because I remember disliking that game, putting it on a shelf, and it wasn't until, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later that I took it out and realized just how stunningly brilliant it is. But I think that there is, when you tinker and are always like making up your own rules and you're playing D&D, there's a tendency to want like a kind of realism. And it's not really a realism. It's just the desire for a game to be closer to like your own imaginative play as a kid. And that's what realism is. Like, I want to have 8 armies in Berlin or whatever. And so there's a kind of arrogance to that. And I think there in high school, I kind of unlearned some of that, which was helpful in actually getting to enjoy the game.
So you moved away from tinkering with games and just enjoying them as they're presented.
Well, I mean, part of it was I started to understand games more. When I was, when you're in middle school, I played Third Reich, but I don't know what the hell game I actually played. I mean, we were just kind of, we were making calls on the fly, and sort of, we'd have battles and then go over to the squad leaderboard and play it out. Because, we were playing these games over months. We had lots of free time.
Right.
And then in high school, I think it was really Battle Cry was one of those games that I think Catan too, both games demanded that you really play by the rules. And then there was a good friend of mine, Corey Porter, he had a weekly Risk game. And so we would play 1 or 2 games of Risk a week. And it was lovely. It's a brilliant game, but only if you play by the rules. And the rules, the thing that makes Risk work is that cascading card turn in. And it's a kind of positional game where who's going to be able to get the rolling cascade that's going to lead them to the win. And that game really only worked if you cut away all the chaff and you just played it with its basic form. If you started table talking and negotiating, suddenly it became this 8-hour thing. And I think that I stopped tinkering at that point, with some considerable exceptions that we can maybe talk about. If you want to go into the games I was tinkering in high school with.
So how do you decide to go from, I'm tinkering with games, be it TI3, be it Risk, or any of the others that you mentioned? How do you go from tinkering to stopping tinkering to game design? How does that transition go?
Well, I mean, so Twilight Imperium was important because I was a huge advocate of the game. I mean, I loved it, but I hated what they did to the 3rd edition. I wanted to love it. I remember we went, one of my friends had an office job, or his dad has an office job, and he printed off Twilight Imperium rule books because we were so excited and bound it with those plastic pronged binders. So we were running around with copies of Twilight Imperium's rule book in our backpacks in high school because we were so pumped for it. And then when we played it, compared to the 2nd edition, which was such a clean design, it just felt unfinished. And I spent years really working on, I think the very first thing I uploaded to BGG is a variant for Twilight Imperium. That gave it the old progression track. I can't remember what it's called now. And that must have been a decade ago. But we really wanted it to work. And then I had a moment when I was in college in Bloomington, Indiana, where my some of the friends that I played with were Fantasy Flight playtesters, and they were tinkerers. They had balanced every game Fantasy Flight ever came out. They had their own house version they were playing. And it was at that, we were playing the best version of Twilight Imperium I could ever play. And then there was something that happened right when I moved to Austin. I went to a game group that was playing Twilight, and they were playing by some other weird house rule that I didn't like. And I realized that the impulse to make variants and to tinker, it destroys the community around a game. And I found myself immediately converted to the side of like play as published. And I think too, that was around the same time as I was playing a lot of Age of Steam. And even though Railways of the World was fun, and even though Steam was kind of a goofy little like variant, I hated the fact that they existed because they really destroyed the community. Because I mean, it's hard to see now, but there was a huge community around Age of Steam that I think existed because it was so monolithic. And the tinkering, maybe I'm glossing over this a little bit, but I think that there was a sense that the fracturing of all the different versions of that game, I think may have hurt the Age of Steam community. And so, I kind of. But then again,
you're looking at the tinkering. I mean, there's a lot of designers that actually got their start by quote unquote tinkering by making different maps for Age of Steam.
Oh yeah, and when I say the community, that's exactly the thing I'm talking about. Is like this was like an engine and a design space that a lot of people were exploring with, I mean, just really fabulous, interesting maps. But when the other variants came out that like weren't necessarily cross-compatible, I felt that like there was a lot of animosity with the whole, I won't re-adjudicate all that stuff, but just the various ownership of the different designs and its story development, I think really polarized that community and hurt it, which is too bad because it was a place where a lot of designers were like learning their craft, whether it's Viard or like, JC. I mean, there's just tons of people were doing really interesting work with Age of Steam maps, and there was an audience for it that I felt like kind of was breaking down a little bit.
Interesting. So that begs the question then, and I'm kind of going a little bit off tangent here, but with Age of Steam, since obviously you enjoyed the game, and why haven't we seen a Cole Wehrle map?
Because I don't know what I would do with an Age of Steam map. I'm trying to think about ones that I've played. I've really enjoyed, I think my favorite map is Sun with a possible... That's
by JC, right?
By JC. I think it's amazing. The way it unwrites Age of Steam is incredible. I also really like... So I feel very satisfied with Age of Steam and the maps that exist. There's no dissatisfaction that's going to like pull me into wanting to do something myself. Whereas with Twilight, I was like, this could be better. And so I had like a desire to fix something, and I'm so happy when I get to play Age of Steam that I get stars in my eyes and have no desire to tinker in that system.
That's fair. So then, if that's the case, let's talk about the games that are your design. So start with the award nominee here. We'll start with the most recent, and we'll get to John Company in a little bit. But in Infamous Traffic, you got to admit it's a bit of a unique, obscure topic.
Yeah,
how does that come to be?
So I think my own design process is that I kind of have two conversations in my head. One of them is about theme and kind of themes that I feel are underexplored, or specifically, there's a tendency in board game design to port, I'll call it like video game historiography, which is a very graduate school way of saying what I'm going to explain right now. Sid Meier's has like a theory of civilization, and there's something that happens in board games where when you make a game about civilization, you're not really making a game about civilization. You're making a game about Sid Meier's theory of civilization. Through the Ages is like the worst offender in that regard. But like Clash of Cultures, both of which are games that have a lot of merit, but like their view of civilization. I was
going to say, careful, you're talking about my number one all-time game here in look, Through the Ages.
Through the Ages is a brilliant game, a game that deserves 100 plays. It's really lovely, but it also, speaking as someone who like works professionally in the study of history. I mean, I'm not a historian. I'm a literary historian, but so I'm kind of adjacent to the field. But it's a Whiggish view of history. It's all progress, and I think Vlada Chvátil. I'm going to screw up his name. I always apologize.
Vlada Chvátil.
Yeah, Chvátil. His designs are all interesting. They all have merit, but they also. He obviously loves Dungeon Keeper, and now we have Dungeon Lords. And so there's this way that video games sort through theme it kind of infects board games. And that isn't a bad thing in and of itself. And I think his new game that's like the first person shooter, or the game that his company put out, I don't know if he designed it, is I saw the cover box, Adrenaline, I think.
I think.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, oh, this is the same thing, where it's like, okay, they're porting.
It really is a first-person shooter in a Euro dudes on a map
which is an interesting space, but I think it can foreclose other things. So I'm always okay. To get back to the main thing, what's animating the design? I have a kind of thematic. I'm just unsettled. Like I want people to approach themes, because if you read a book on the Civil War, that book can be written dozens of ways. Social history and economic. I mean, there's just the Marxist. There's just so many different ways of writing a history of the Civil War. And then when you look at games, you're like, okay, well, you can make it political, like for the people, or you could make it like a military sandbox. And then that's it. And so, and I think that that limitation speaks to a tendency to look to video games and then to adapt what works there. So I'm always kind of interested in looking at themes that I think are underserved and that might be interesting in games. And so all the games I've done about the British Empire have kind of been because there are a lot of games about colonization that aren't actually about colonization. And so I kind of want to investigate that area. But that's one wheel that spins. The other wheel has to do with just math and the kind of math questions I'm interested in. And, that has to do with relationships and incentives and the kinds of formal questions that intrigue me. So in that sense, zero-sum economies and infamous traffic and risk, how risk gets I mean, that entire game is basically about different systems for working through risk. So I was thinking about that question, and then I was also thinking about how weird it was that there's never been a game on the Opium Wars, and I thought, oh, maybe these two topics are talking to each other.
I think it's a fantastic thing because, as I said when we were talking about it in the Golden Elephant Award episode, not a lot of games out there on that topic.
Well, and it was one that very nearly didn't exist. I mean, I'd designed it originally for Phil, but it just didn't work. One of the things I think is important about design and that should be emphasized more, and this is true of a lot of different forms of artistic production. I throw away like 4 or 5 designs for every one that gets as far as John Company got. And so with Infamous Traffic, I had something, but it just didn't work. And it was just too weird. And then the way that game came to be is I wrote this article on games in the Civil War and history for Tom when he was editing the magazine Ya. And he really liked it. And then kind of as we were working through the editing process, he was like, oh, well, I'm going to start this company next year. Do you want to give me something? And so I sent him an email with like, these are the 3 or 4 things I'm working on. And there's also this like weird little Opium Wars thing. And he was like, oh, well, why don't you do the Opium Wars game? And I thought, all right, I'll try it out. And what saved that game was his production constraint. He said, look, you can have a board about this big. You can have 178 counters. We could do dice and cubes maybe, but you get like a sheet.
Interesting. So the design was actually came to be based on those constraints.
Oh yeah, the very first thing I did was grid out a piece of paper with that many counters, and I just thought, all right, how many is going to be spent? Like I started with the conspiracy pool. Like how big did I need it to be for the variants that I wanted it to be in the game? And then I built all the systems around how big the conspiracy pool was. And then I thought, all right, well, that's going to leave me, about 18 counters per player. So, okay, and I want, like, if I divide the production chain, I mean, the Opium Traffic was a little more complicated than that, as you might guess. But I thought, all right, I'm going to divide the production chain. If I'm going to have them do these certain things, I can really only have 3 different kinds of counters. So the whole game like started with that sheet. And then it fixed all these problems I was having because I was designing kind of a PAX style game with a big 128 card deck or 120 card deck. And so forcing myself to say like, all right, just get rid of everything that's not needed and really strip it down. It was tremendously productive. And that was a game that came into being very quickly. There was all my games have very long gestations, but then once they click, it happens very fast. And I was in the hospital for the birth of my second son, and it was very long. It was very like the first son was born at home, and it was a long labor for my wife, but relatively fast and kind of simple because we were just at home with a midwife.
Okay.
And the second one was complicated at a hospital, but it was very boring. We were just sitting there waiting. And we played card games and chatted, and she slept a lot. And while she was sleeping, I just typed out the rules to Infamous Traffic. And that's basically where that game came from. So it seems like a game that was painful and stressed. It was produced in a stressful situation.
Fascinating. All right. So on the flip side, then, so PAX Premier. Now it's interesting. You talk about with an Infamous Traffic that you had ideas designing it based or kind of following the PAX kind of series, kind of inspiration there. So backing up now, PAX Premier, how did that come to be? And how did you and Phil first get together, and how did this work?
Yeah, it's, so when I moved to Austin, there was a little game store down the street from my house called Great Hall Games, sadly closed, but what must have been the best game store I've ever been to in my life. It's really a tragedy that closed because many game stores have similar selections and are similarly curated. And this was one of those game stores that you walk in and you think, what are these games? Like, I feel like I know games pretty well, but it just, I remember the very first time I walked in, the first title, the one that was like on the shelf, it was like Confucius, which is a
very esoteric, very obscure.
I mean, yeah, they were just a weird game group. And then I walked in the back room where people were playing, and they were playing Lords of the Spanish Main.
There you go, which is Phil Eklund, Sierra Madre.
It's an old Phil Eklund game. And I played it and loved it. And then I walked out of that store with, I think it was Origins or High Frontier, which had just come out. And then like the next week, everyone was playing High Frontier, picked up a copy of that. And I just slowly cleaned them out of all their Phil Eklund over the first few months, living high on my graduate stipend, probably spending too much money on Phil Eklund games. But so, there was a big community in Austin playing his games, and that made it easy to kind of get in there. And then I was teaching myself Photoshop, and I was doing that by doing map redraws. And so I redrew the map for Lords of the Sierra Madre, which is I didn't do a very good job. But I thought highly enough of it at the time to post it on BGG. And then Phil sent me a note and said, "This looks great. Like maybe we'll do another edition someday, or maybe like we'll see if we can put you in." So I kind of found myself like in I think you could probably buy that map on Zazzle or something. But I was like in that little community then because Phil had reached out to me. And then I did a really big redraw of Lords of the Renaissance, which took a few months, and boy, did I screw it up. I mean, it could have been really good. I remember that when I printed it, I was so thrilled. I mean, I'd worked on this thing for months, and when I printed it, it was just clearly too dark. But because I didn't know what I was doing, I had exported the files like as JPEGs as I was working. And so like I couldn't go back and fix it because I had essentially deleted it as I was building it. I really was quite
that's
stupid.
Horrible.
But anyway, it was very pretty on the screen. It just didn't print well. But Phil really liked that. And, so to cut that story kind of short.
So what you're telling me is Phil Eklund was a huge Cole Wehrle fanboy.
Yeah, he liked my graphic design. Yeah, early on. But I was very much, I think there was a wave, and it's funny, the little circumstances. Like, to my mind, the Phil Eklund wave, the one that he's riding right now, it was the posting of the High Frontier map on BGG, and it just sat there on the front page for months because it was so incredible looking and eye-catching.
It really is.
Yeah, yes. And I think I just remember like for weeks being like, wow, that map. And it was just sitting there, and it was drawing people to his games. So, but I had kind of gotten there through happenstance like a couple weeks early. And then when Porfiriana came out, I mean, I got that game back because he didn't, he had his little customer base, but before he kind of hit it big, Porfiriana, I remember he sent it out before Essen, which is crazy now knowing how the production schedule goes, that he was able to like send out copies of Porfiriana before Essen. But when I got that in 2012, in the fall of 2012, which I think is about the same time Gelato, it was like that same year.
That's when I got into the hobby. Yep.
I was playing Porfiriana like weekly, daily, as much as I could possibly play that game. I loved it. And it made me, there was a funny little note at the end of Porfiriana. Phil's wearing a sombrero, and it says, "If you can think of other games in the Lord's universe, submit them. Here's my AOL email account. Like, send this to my way." And I thought, well, I have all these files from Renaissance. I should make PAX Renaissance. And so that over Thanksgiving, I wasn't going anywhere that year. And so I stayed home and just wrote this crazy PAX Renaissance game and sent it to Phil. And he was like, "Oh, this looks great." And he kind of put me in an email with like Stefano and Matt, his son, and him.
Which are the main play testers.
Yeah. And then I kind of was like in their design process. Now, there is nothing, I think all that remains of my design of PAX Renaissance is like the epigraph. Like literally, like I have a quote from Brodell about the Wheels of Commerce, which I think is still like on the head of the Living Rules Google Doc. But that's it. That's the only thing that survived because it wasn't good. But I kind of learned how Phil's development cycle works just by reading those emails and kind of, having backs and forths with him. But I just didn't really know what I was doing. But then later on, when Greenland was playtesting, I helped a lot with the Greenland playtest. And that's where I think Phil saw that our group was giving him a lot of feedback and was pretty. I mean, the thing about playtesting is groups are going to burn out in 5 or 6 plays. It's the nature of the beast.
Okay.
So you have lots of turnover, and when you do get a group that is able to play through 30 plays, like you've got something special. I think Phil.
That's got to be invaluable to a designer. Absolutely invaluable.
And it was a circumstance where I had the right neighbors that were interested in the game, and we liked Greenland. We were kind of playing it a lot, and we got stuck into it. And during that time, I had a close friend of mine, Chris Contreras, died. And it was someone I had grown up with, someone I played and made games with. He was in all the... In fact, I think on BGG there's a picture of me somewhere of me playing Twilight Imperium, and he's like the person sitting next to me. Anyway, he passed away tragically, and I just thought, like, all right, I could be working on my field exam, but I think I kind of just want to like make a game instead. And so I spent that summer, I mean, not that summer, that winter, the winter after he died, I just spent it working on Premier. Like, what was
that kind of like a cathartic?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was just one of those moments where you're like, well, I could get my job, but this suddenly seemed more important. And Premier had been like a game that I was kind of I mean, I've been thinking about it for a long time, but kind of struggling with it. And so there were kind of two things that happened close to each other. One of them is I saw a talk on campus from a historian just talking about the role of local politics in Afghani history. And it was fabulous. And I thought, I've always wanted to make a game about the great game and about Central Asia. But the problem is it's very easy to get into kind of James Bond secret agent territory. And I didn't have an angle. And he was like, just elevating the locals. I was like, oh, those are the players. And as soon as I had that, and with my friend dying and just be thinking a lot about what I wanted to do with the next few years of my life, those things happening at the same time pretty much led to the generation of Premier.
Interesting. I mean, first off, I'm sorry to hear that about your friend.
Many years now.
But still, that's fascinating where you can find inspiration to design a board game. That's so, I've never heard of that.
It was a funny thing because, I mean, I'm at a lot of these academic events, you're wearing suits and ties and everyone's drinking like a sherry. Sometimes they are more cartoonish than you even would expect. You walk in and you think, oh my goodness, like, is this actually what I'm doing? And to think that I'm talking to this eminent historian and I'm just scribbling down a board game design.
That's fantastic, man. That's great. So ultimately, how did PAX Premier come to be, though? It sounds like kind of a mix between, did you have Porfiriana on the brain and so you wanted to make this fit in that universe? Or because you're talking about the theme of the locals, but then also talking about how you were just smitten, for lack of a better word, on Porfiriana. So how, it sounds like kind of a meshing of the two.
It was. And there was another conversation. I mentioned that usually there was a thematic issue and then there's also a formal one. And the formal one was I was having many conversations about Race for the Galaxy and about PAX, because as different as those games are, they're both engine builders. There's a kind of race element to them. And the other game, I mean, 2012 was like a seminal year for me because it was PAX, it was Keyflower, it was Great Zimbabwe, Terra Mystica. I hope I'm not messing that up, but I do feel like all those games came out in the same year.
I'll buy that. I'm
gonna have to check.
Regardless,
I'm gonna have to check.
Fantastic games.
No,
yes.
There was like there was just something in the air. It may be that I'm combining 2 years, but anyway, one of the things that I was playing a lot of Race for the Galaxy because I have a love-hate relationship to that game. Again, it's totally brilliant. It's my own personal.
A lot of people do.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about tableau builders and engine builders and how over the course of the game they pull people away from each other. At the very beginning of Race, it's really dependent on your ability to read when people are going to take certain actions. And as the game goes on...
to be able to piggyback on that stuff, sure.
Yeah, as the game goes on, you become pretty self-sufficient. And that's the way a lot of engine builders work. It's about becoming self-sufficient. And then when you play Great Zimbabwe, it's the opposite. The more the game goes on, the more you all get bound up. And I thought, I wonder if there's a way to make a tableau builder that's also a portfolio game and is pulling people together in that same way. then I
because
thought,
you like your sharp.
Yeah,
I've read and heard your quote. You like sharp elbows.
Yeah, I do. I want to really. I mean, there's something intimate about playing games with other people, and I think that is when I think about what the game form can do. I think the difference between games and movies and games and books and games and art is that there is an intimacy that they offer, and it's a social intimacy. And I've played RPGs, but not that much, and I've never LARPed or anything. But I think that the game form, it offers like a closeness. And so because that's the thing that I feel like the form does well, I want to ratchet it up. I want to be as close as possible. And the sharp elbows are just, they're just a consequence of that intimacy. And
a happy consequence,
yeah, a happy
consequence.
And so in Premier, the fact that the game is defined by your alignment with the other players, and that how that alignment kind of shifts throughout the game. In that a lot changed in Premier over its development, but in that element, it's almost exactly what I imagined it would be. So far with all of my designs, I've had like a single thing where I'm like, this is going to be a Tableau portfolio game. And then everything changes, but like the central investigation is usually pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to be when I started the game, even though, yes, so much will change.
So on that note, then, what would you say is your process for designing games? I mean, you've come up with the ideas from different inspirations, it sounds like, but once you get to a certain point, what's that process like?
I think... So I could divide it into a few different stages. I think at the beginning, it's about trying to figure out exactly what the question I want the game to be about. In Infamous Traffic, the question has to do with the auction for the prizes and the risk involved. And then the second stage is just about articulating that question. And so all of the other systems are like, they all orbit that central question. And so I am not a systems first, or I'm not a mechanics first designer. My mechanics are totally at the service of the central questions of the design. They come later, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about like, ooh, this is a clever thing. Like I just, that thought, like it will never enters my mind.
You're all about manipulating the mechanics to suit the questions that you're trying to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time like writing functions and like drawing little network maps and like thinking about points of pressure and leverage. And like coming up with a language. I think that sometimes it's helpful. I kind of will like draw on my humanities background, trying to come up with a language to describe my question, because usually I don't really have like a way of even talking about it. And so a big stage in my process, sometimes years, is just like figuring out the words that I need to describe the thing that I'm doing.
And that, I think right there is a fantastic way to describe when we call a game opaque.
Yeah.
And why it's so hard sometimes to explain, be it yours, be it Phil Eklund's, and just you understand the mechanics. Okay, I can do this, I can do this, but why and what are the repercussions of these decisions? And I think what you just said is a perfect way to, you have to generate the language.
Yeah, no, and I think that opacity is something that I like in designs that I play, because it means, for me, sometimes like one of my favorite like definition of a game is simply the decision space which adjudicates a winner. I just love it. It's so clean. But there's a corollary to that definition, which is that in order for a game to be interesting, it has to be on the edge of your cognition, right? Like if I play tic-tac-toe with my son, it's like blowing his mind. But
right, sure.
Once you've got mastery of it, like you know how to describe that game, even if you don't have the words for it. But the best games are the ones that are like just outside of your reach. And so when I'm playing a game that's opaque, I love having to come up with a language to describe the problems I'm having. And there are games, I mean, when I play 1830, I struggle with that game, because there are things about the way money moves in the game and the way the economy works that I just, I don't understand why things happen the way they do. I mean, I understand the rules. I've played it dozens and dozens of times, but it's it's still like a vexing and interesting design in the way it's dealing with incentives and all kinds of things. But, so I spend a lot of time coming with that language. And in fact, oftentimes I don't even fully develop it, but it will get to a point where I'll feel like I'll have some kind of, I'll know enough that I can start kind of domesticating those ideas and pulling them into an easier range. So the design process is about like figuring out what body is like floating out in like the far reaches, lassoing it, and then slowly pulling it into intelligibility. And at that point, I will start actually building what looks like a game. And once that game, once I'm convinced that it's interesting and compelling, I will build it. So the prototype is like years into the process. The first prototype emerges, and then I will, I'll show it to a few friends, my wife, and then we work on it. We work on it. If we still think it has life in it, we start searching out playtesters and to begin the development process, which is it's a whole nother thing.
Well, go with that. So what happens at that point? So are you talking to where you're going with finding your own playtesters, or are you talking about, okay, we have a publisher, be it Sierra Madre, be it Hollenspiel, whoever. At that point, you hand it off to them, or you're still extremely active when it comes to that step, right?
So all the games I've done so far, I have been, if not in charge, more or less, I've controlled the development process pretty closely. Premier is a little bit of an exception for a couple of reasons, but usually I like to control the development process, and it isn't, well, okay, I'll say a few things about the development process. Development is really hard. It's very different from all the other parts of design because it involves the coordination of schedules and there's a little bit of public relations and
all the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, and it also has to do with generating metrics. So okay, now you've got your language. Now turn that language into an effective way of testing it. And then of course there's also the copy editing and the component design, kind of the user all the UI stuff. So there's just a lot of things happening at the same time for development. With Premier, I had an open call, tons of people signed up, and I found the development of Premier completely exhausting. Premier would not exist except for the fact that my brother happened to be living with me, and we got to play the game daily. And it was me, my brother, my wife were playing Premier all the time. And there were some other close friends in Austin who were helping. But the broader community, they were wonderful, and the game wouldn't exist without them. But I didn't know how to use a big group of anonymous strangers on the internet yet. With Infamous Traffic, that development was entirely closed. I was visiting my family in the Midwest, and I had a summer, and I just played it with my brothers every day. We just kept playing it, kept working on it. Got to the point where, and there were some close friends who would cycle in and out of games, but I felt like the thing that the playtesters gave me was guidance in writing rules, and was just a good eye on components and usability. Premier, before it had Premier was a very hard game to imagine before it got fixed later in the process, and Phil's talked about that elsewhere. But with Infamous Traffic, I just felt like I had answers to those questions. The rules were simple, they were. It was just an easier game to write the rules to. They're more programmatic, and I had access to playtesters. And so we just did it. And when I gave it to Tom and Mary, I felt very happy with it, but I also had no idea how it would do. They're starting a company. They didn't really have a brand yet. They hadn't published any games when I gave it to them. And so I thought, I sent them this email that said, okay, here's the game. It'll arrive in the mail soon. I really like it, but it's really mean and strange. And if you want to change it, if you want to do anything, if you want to develop, just do it. Because I felt totally happy with the game as released. So, whatever, they turn it into a Euro, and it does really well, in German. And it looks nothing like my game. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that, because I know that my game exists in PDF form, on my USB. And I produced the thing I wanted to produce. And then if they're going to make a mass market version of it, it's fine. So I thought there's no way they're going to publish this thing as I gave it to them.
Oops.
Yeah. And then I got this email back saying we have one question about prize distribution, but everything else looks fine.
Nice.
And they might have, I think that they helped me. There was something about the industry leaders got victory points. attached to them, but that was it. And they really, I think, I don't know. I'm to this day a little shocked that they didn't want to fiddle with it more. And it wasn't that I thought it needed fiddling. Well, that's not true. It's to make it. It's a publisher's job to sell the thing, and you just
didn't think it was going to sell.
Yeah, I didn't think it had. I knew that myself and my brothers really liked it, and that was about it.
All right, so why do you design games then? I mean, are you designing for Cole? Are you designing for your friends? Are you designing it? Obviously, from the sound of it, you're not designing for what you think the market, quote unquote, is interested in. So why does Cole design games?
I think, it's the same reason why I work on articles or, while I'm writing my dissertation. There are questions that I don't know the answer to, and there are certain forms that are better about answering those questions than others. And so there are games that so I think that there are two parts. One of them is it's an interesting form to work in, and I feel like I can explore topics that I couldn't imagine. The other one has to do with just the fact that I design games that I would like to play. I mean, John Company is a game that I've been dreaming about since 2009 or 2008. When I was in Bloomington, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we played a game where everybody was like operating in the same company, but it was sort of all about respectability politics. And, and that's the seed of a lot of the games I've produced. But that was a game that I just wanted to play and that didn't exist. I mean, I remember I found out about Republic of Rome, and I just wanted to play it so bad. And I went to
old Richard Berg, right?
I don't know if Berg. It's an Avalon. I don't think it's Berg. but it's an old Avalon Hill game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not Pax Romana, which may be
right.
Berg. I get my war games backwards sometimes. But Republic of Rome is an old Avalon Hill game. Got republished by Valley. But before it got republished, so this is like in the early aughts. Boy, did I want to play that game. And we would go to Gen Con every year, which is only, it was just down the road basically. And there was an auction in Gen Con where they had old games. That's where I got my copy of Dune for pennies, right before the prices went up. And I wanted to play Republic of Rome so bad. And I got into a bidding war with somebody and he got it. And I thought, damn it, I really wanted to play Republic of Rome. And then I went out to the hall and I was talking to all the people and looking at games, thinking about buying things. I found a copy of a game called Mechanicsburg. I think that's what it's called. Mechanicsburg had a thing on the box where it said, everyone is trying to keep the city alive, but only one player is going to win. And it kind of sounded like remotely like Republic of Rome. And I just bought it, and it was really expensive. And it's an interesting game that is more ambitious than it is good. And
Cole has poor impulse control.
I have really poor impulse control, especially for weird games. If it's some strange thing I've never heard of, I am much more likely to buy it than something in the top 100.
You and me both.
But I remember taking it home and learning it and thinking, this is definitely not the game that I wanted. And trying to tinker with it and fix it. And then I was like, I'll just put it away. And I just, it got put on a shelf somewhere. But so in terms of the general question about who I design for, I'm designing for myself mostly. But also so I'm designing for questions that I kind of want answered. But then also there's a selfish impulse where I kind of want to design the games that I want to play. One of the saddest things with the development process is by the end, you're a little sick of your game, like you've played it 100 times.
When you're talking about playing testing and play testing, I'm like, I couldn't do it. I that's part of the reason I imagine why I have zero interest in designing a game, because I would burn out way too easy. I
have a lot of friends who dabble in design, and the main thing that keeps them from finishing is just because it takes a long time, and a lot of you really.
So
learn,
okay, so do you like playing your games at this point?
Yes, I'm not. It's funny. Martin Wall said something about how said this, I think, to a Tom Vassell interview from 03 or 04.
Oh yeah, way back in the day.
Yeah, way back in the day.
Yeah,
he said that the only game of his that he enjoys playing is Age of Steam. And I always thought that was I love playing my own games. I do. I really. I mean, Premier is.
You just need a break after the design.
I do. I need a break after the design. Where I think with Premier, I finished it, and then it came out in time for BGG-Con, and I played it a ton at BGG-Con. And then when I went home for Christmas, I played it a ton. I was just so happy to play it. And Infamous Traffic, there was a similar thing where I played it a ton over the summer, took a few months break, and then played it a lot over BGG-Con. And it was like, oh yeah, this is a good one. I kind of fell in love with it again. With John Company, I'm finding myself getting close. Like the very last stage of development is kind of infuriating because everything works and you're really happy with everything. But you could make this thing cost like $1 more. And it's not that it will break the game or save the game. It just like changes the shape a little bit. So it's sort of like the last stages of audio balancing or something where you're like, the game could go a little down. And it's not going to make or break it. And it's exhausting because you do want to make the best thing, but it can be kind of frustrating too.
This is hitting way close to home, especially with the new studio and everything that we've had going on. Trust me, I know exactly what you're talking about. So on that note, though, do you ever want to go back and revisit or tinker? Or in addition to that, where do you draw the line? And is it a line that says, okay, I'm done, that's it? Or is it, this is good enough and I really could keep messing with this forever, but I just got to get it out the door just to be done with it? So where do you draw that line?
It's tough. I have a deep ambivalence about living rules. There is a degree to which I dislike living rules for how they fracture communities. So for
I like the earlier version. No, yeah. I'll only play it with this.
Right, only the first edition, only the second edition. I mean, Fresh Fish, whatever. I mean, there are too many examples. Well, the one that like hit me was High Frontier, which I am a huge fan of High Frontier, but I have never looked at the Google Doc with the living rules. And one of the reasons why I've been such an ardent, I always play by the rules as published. I thought the game worked fine. You had to make a couple calls on the fly. But one of the reasons why I am an unapologetic supporter of the third edition is I feel like it, whatever the small production errors, that is so minor compared to the achievement of taking all of the variants and all of the inconsistencies and saying, this is the third edition rulebook. It brings everything into harmony. I mean, that's huge. That is the difference between squad leader and advanced squad leader. And that, there's almost nothing like that in gaming. Just because nobody will do it. It's much easier to have a new edition where you like make a couple little balances, you tweak the rules a little bit.
Right.
You put it in the variant. Fantasy Flight's terrible at this. They put it in the variant section. Where, it was every one of the Twilight's expansions, I thought they're going to fix it. And instead they're like, here are 15 more optional rules.
Sure.
Why don't you guys finish?
And now, how do you play it?
Right. Yeah.
Depends where you go.
Yeah, it depends on where you go. So so in terms of finishing the project, I want to finish well. I have an impulse to think, the game's going to get published. We're going to do a run of X Mini, and the vast majority of those people are going to be playing by the printed rules, no matter what I happen to say. Because this is like the loudest. This is the loudest megaphone I'm going to get is like the one that sends the files to China.
Exactly.
Yeah. And with Kyber Knives, which I think fixed a lot of, it wasn't that Premiere had problems. It was just, it wasn't in the right shape, where after I played it a bunch after it was released, I thought there are some things that we cut out at the beginning for production constraints that probably should be back in there. And there were some areas of the game I wanted to explore. And I knew though that in publishing Kyber Knives, that I was going to reach half of my
which
initial
is the
audience.
expansion for Premiere
Knives,
for those.
Expansion to Premiere. Right. And it came out the year following, and it's just a deck of cards and a few pieces. It's 60 cards. But I knew that expansion was going to reach half of the players of Premiere, and that of those half, only a small percentage would actually play it, because it's that first year where you're going to build your player base. And I'm sure those percentages are a little bit different because of the nature of Sierra Madre Games fan base. But I knew that that there were going to be a lot of people playing Premiere. But at the same time, I had time and I still had the files, because I knew that if I didn't do it that year, and in fact, the hard drive with the Premiere files failed, and I need to go get it restored. So I could.
That's terrifying.
I have the publication files are safe because they're on Dropbox, but the original files that I used to build those are totally gone. I'll have to send it in for a hard drive restoration. But I knew that because I had those. And because I remembered how they worked, when you work on like a big video or audio project, you got to finish it when it's in your brain, because as you get far away from that, you're going to forget like how the files were linked. And so I knew that was the moment we finished it. And if there's ever another edition of Premiere, and I hope there will be someday, it'll have Kyber knives in it, and it will have the alternate victory condition as the real victory condition. And there will be no Kyber knives. It will just be PAX Premier, and it will have all
this
the things
is
in it.
just the game.
Right.
Okay. So how do you reach that point, though, for you? Like, is it a definitive, okay, that's it, I'm done, I know this is the game I meant to make? Or is it that perpetual, well, because let's face it, you're not doing this for a living. You're doing this to answer those questions, as you said earlier. So because you are not on any kind of production time frame, like, oh, I have to be able to make my mortgage payment right now, I have to push this out the door. So because you don't have that, is it one of those things to where you have to draw a line and say, okay, look, I am done. Really, yeah.
So I do work with the feeling of having to get it out of the shop. So when I start a project, any project that I've taken to development, I know when I want to submit it and be done. Like I have that in my mind. Like to the day. Like when I started the development. So John Company's development started about this time last year, where I was in the middle of Infamous Traffic and I kind of got it going. But I knew at that moment that at May 15th, I was going to submit the files to Phil, assuming he bought it. But I mean,
so you do have these self-made,
and
artificial. I mean, I'm not trying to undersell these deadlines that you're saying you put, but you have made these. There's no outside force on this.
Well, there's an outside force in that, I know that in order to make the Essen fair, Phil has got to get the files by May, and then we'll do like final reads on it, and then it's produced in June, July, and then it gets on the boat.
Sure.
And with Tom and Mary, I knew that they needed it at the end of the summer. And so what happens, so when I build, I mean, it's the same way I approach doing any kind of writing or research, where you start, like the first thing I do when I sit down, and this is, again, long gestation periods. John Company, a decade of like thinking about that game. And then when I get to the point where it's ready for development, I say, okay, it's ready for development. Development will take 1 year. And I go to the end and I just work backwards and say, all right, this needs to be done by this day. And I have a big schedule, and I've been crossing items off the same schedule that I drew up like a year ago. And it was funny, I sent out an email to my playtesters because I just posted the typeset rules. And I said, guys, we're a day ahead of schedule. The typeset rules are up. And I don't know if they know, but like that's a schedule I wrote last summer, just sort of keeping, the way things need to go. So, but your question about leaving a project and letting go is tricky. What happens for me is I will still be interested in certain questions, but I will realize that they are not questions for the design on the table.
For this game.
And there was a moment with Infamous Traffic where I was like, oh, I want to like put this thing in there. And I thought, no, actually, that's a John Company question. And with John Company, there's a big question about like the country trade and all the stuff about the Omari Empire. And I was like, oh, these are really interesting elements. But that's not this game. That's some other game, and I'll think about it later. John Company is very high level. Every turn is 15 years. It's kind of a multi-generational, because it really, you work through 150 years in an evening, so it's got to be high level. There's another game to make about the East India Company that's more like that BBC series Taboo. It's very conspiratorial and dark alleys, and is a little more interested in the day-to-day operations, which would be lovely, an interesting game, but wasn't this one. So every once in a while there would be, I'd have a playtester say like, what if you could do this or have different kinds of goods? And I'm like, no. Every turn is a year,
Stay on target.
Stay on target. So a lot of that is like filtering it, putting it in the notebook, putting it in other documents, and realizing that like there'll be another game where I can hit those issues. Because again, for every game that I feel like I can put to development, there are a lot that just are in the box. And I think it's been very helpful to feel like I'm not I never feel like this is my like one shot to like nail it. It's like there are certain questions that John Company like can't talk about because the design grew in a certain way that foreclosed certain investigations, and that's fine.
Okay,
and it helps establish a kind of finality because you always want to put more in it, but sometimes you don't have time, and also sometimes like the design isn't as capacious as you want.
So you're just focused on, okay, here are the questions that I need asked in this game. These are, and does this game answer those questions? Yes, it's done.
Yeah, no, that's it. And there are, with John Company, so I'll tell you something that some people know about this. I don't think I've announced it anywhere. John Company has a weird shadow game. So I'll break some news for you. John Company has a weird shadow game called Nizam. And it was conceived in parallel to John Company. And it's a game where, so John Company has these region cards that move around and kind of like power the events, and you're filling orders on them. In this version of the game, this totally separate game called Nizam, there are no regions. The players are the regions. And the dream of this game, and so the players get to play like basically Indian princely states. And so the dream was that John Company would be this like 1 to 12 player. You can mix any number of British families and Indian families. And you're like playing two sides of it. And that game got fairly far in development, but it started getting out of the scope of John Company. There were ways I could kind of plug it in, and John Company got more interesting. And so I thought like, okay, maybe someday I'll like make this weird like full box standalone expansion that can be combined and like live up to these crazy dreams about being the game about India in the 18th century. But this is outside of the game, and I need to decouple them because those cash economies were like tied, like in the element of the design, like they were really growing close. But I thought, maybe this will be like next year, the year after, I'll like investigate this project more.
Nice.
And so when I finish the project, I don't usually feel a lot of regret, mostly because I've pruned all those branches much earlier on.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that kind of answers that question. And I like how you were so focused on, okay, here's the question. Does it answer it? Yep. All right. On to the next thing, that type thing. But that said, do you ever feel motivated to go back and tinker? Now, I understand what you're saying about like talking about kind of this broad scope, massive John Company game. That's not tinkering. That's a major addition to. What about tinkering? Or are you like, you know what? I'm real happy with where this is. Let's just move on to the next game.
Yeah, well, it's not, I don't even think it has to do with my happiness so much as it's just like, it is the game that was produced or something. I'm trying to think about an example. I've got one. Premier, the suits are imbalanced on purpose. There are fewer political cards than there are economic cards or spies or whatever. That was a decision I was never super happy with. It had to do with the fact that we could only have 120 cards in the box. There were production constraints that forced it. I wasn't totally content with it. And it was a pretty minor thing. I mean, it's basically, should I add 3 or 4 more purple cards?
Right.
When it came time for Kyber Knives, I realized that I could readjust the deck distribution by adding more cards of a certain suit. And I did that to a degree. Like I did tinker it a little bit farther to the purple, to the political suit. But I decided to keep the original irregularity of the game because that was the game. And it was just like the thing that was produced, it had agency in the world. And I didn't want to say, no, I'd really like a scene where Han Solo like walks around Jabba the Hutt and like steps on his tail. Like I just didn't want to do that. I thought, no, this is a game that has kind of weird irregular suits and I should just let it be its own thing. So I really try to resist that. Another, with Infamous Traffic, I remember I had a fleeting thought of being like, should I take out those negative prizes and just make them zeros? And I thought,
no.
After some thought, I was like, no, that's, I could tinker, it's that saying that you could tinker forever. And I tend to default on to treat the thing that was published like seriously as a thing that now exists.
Respect the
you want to respect
product.
the thing that's generated because if Infamous Traffic was the result of my thinking like circa 2016, and it's always going to be that, and I don't want to put myself in a role where I'm curating my own works because it's disingenuous. Because my own thinking about that work is going to change in the next few years, and so the idea of constantly like refiguring it. Now, all that being said, if in a decade a publisher says, "Oh, Infamous Traffic, we're going to like retheme it. It's going to be about lemmings. It's going to be great." that's fine. Like I feel, there's a way
because an infamous traffic exists.
It already exists, and I don't have to like keep watching over it. Right? It has its own body. I'll leave that at that.
All right. So there's a quote that you wrote on your website that I found just thought-provoking, I think is a good way to put it. So it says, quote, "I consider games a serious art form, capable of expression and argumentation and worthy of critical engagement. My own designs are positioned at the intersection of my research and my pedagogy. I'm especially interested in designing games that offer new perspective and fresh subjects." And I originally was going to ask you to expand on that, but I feel like you've actually covered all that really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the conversation about the artiness of games or non-artiness of games, I just feel like it's been settled. Like it's, the definition of art that I give to my students, and I think it's one of my favorite definitions. I don't know if I stole it or if I made it up. I honestly do not know.
Go with it. Own it.
Okay,
it's yours.
This is my definition of art. Art is the word that you use to protect the things that you value. And that's it. That's all it is. So, the parent says, Radiohead is a stupid band. The Beatles are true art. And their parents said the same thing about Sinatra, and their parents said the same thing about Stravinsky, and their et cetera,
because
et cetera.
it all is, our art is very personal and very subjective, and as long as it makes you feel something, then mission accomplished.
Right,
right?
And also because art, it's a, this is Bordeaux, right? But it's a kind of capital. It's something that's valuable. Your knowledge. If I think the Beatles are a bad band, I don't. But let's say I think the Beatles are a bad band. You love the Beatles. Well, you've got all this body of knowledge about the Beatles, and I've just made that knowledge less valuable because I don't care.
You've exactly.
Right? I mean, this is like when you talk to people about games, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the Splotter. I don't care about Splotter," and you're like, "What? These are seminal designs." And that decision about value has to do with our own positioning. So when I'm talking about art, I'm speaking about it just sort of as human expression and the kinds of human expressions that we value. And so, I want, because I have found myself making games and I'm interested in that form, I want other people to treat it with value. But at the same time, like I know that these are things that we have to negotiate and go back and forth on. The main thing that I push against, though, is the idea of something as being pure entertainment as being not as important. When the Gamergate thing broke, which is something that animated my own brief experiment in podcasting, which might come back. I had a podcast with a friend named Lily Zhu called Culture Bites Back, where we just we experimented with the form, but we were thinking a lot about games as something that was worth attention, because when you call it just entertainment, you remove the gravity of the expression.
Totally agree. I actually was interviewed by Safari Ltd. The little dolls, the little miniatures, the little rubber animals. Mm-hmm. The lady interviewing me had no frame of reference about this hobby mm-hmm. whatsoever. And I had mentioned to her how it's a social gathering. It's how we come together as friends, and it builds community, and it does all these things. And to just say, oh, it's just a way to pass the time, and I'm like, that's kind of selling it a little short. And so she came around to understanding it. So is that that's exactly it. Like it
has to, like, I think that questions of legitimacy, there's a degree to which they're always very boring. They're important, but they're boring. They're only boring because I think that we should be inclined to grant legitimacy to things that we care about. So for that reason, because I think it's kind of a settled argument, but it becomes less settled when you talk to people who don't value those things.
Totally.
And I the other thing is I think that there's a tendency to in criticism to take seriously certain kinds of expression. And, so like you watch a David Lynch movie and you're like, I don't really know what I watched, but he's smart and people like him and maybe there's more going on. And there's something humbling there, right? Or the other reviewer's like, well, that was boring or something. But I think
that was a waste of my time.
So there's this other resonance of art that I appreciate a lot, which is, if this expression, if it, by virtue of the creator calling their work art, they're asking the viewer, the player, the listener to take their expression seriously, even if they find it disarming, disharmonious. Like they're gonna dwell on it, or they should. And I think one of the reasons why I love music and I love weird films so much is because I love going into something that I don't understand and even dislike, and then have to kind of like sit on it and like work through it.
And chew it over and be like, why?
Right. Yeah. So I wish there were more games like that. I mean, a designer I really admire, who somehow is like still not broken through the way that he should have. I mean, I guess he has, but Nate Hayden.
Who's local?
Who's a
to
local
us here? He's down in the Springs. Yes.
I mean, Cave Evil
and
is
for those listening, Cave Evil, San Quentin Kings. You have
Mushroom
Pablo, Mushroom Eaters. You have After Pablo. All of these Grail games of mine.
Oh, and
yes.
they, his games. When you open up Cave Evil, it is the work of. I mean, it reminds me of the computer game Dwarf Fortress or something, where it's just two brothers in a little apartment somewhere in the woods in Washington, like producing the thing that they wanted to produce and taking their work very seriously. And so the fact that in Cave Evil, the counters are very hard to read because it's dark red on a matte black, but that's kind of the ethos that what the game's going for. I mean, it's like an early Richard Breeze title where like he had a vision and then he's producing this vision with this just wonderful. I mean, I think maybe overly charmed by that theory of art, the craftsmanship. I mean, it's one of the reasons why Phil has asked me occasionally, like, oh, do you want me to like get a graphic designer? And I thought, it would save me a lot of time. And I don't think I'm good enough to like do John Company, but I think I just want to get better at InDesign. And I really care about like bringing it all to like kind of doing everything. I don't mean it as.
Although I will say some people and discussing rule books, just saying there's room for growth there.
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. And I'm learning a lot about rules writing the more I do it, because I find it very, very hard. Rules writing is not the way
I've heard that's the hardest thing to do in all of this hobby,
and
writing a good rule book.
Yeah, it's tough, and it like a lot of other kinds of writing, the more you work on it, the more you realize how difficult. Like, it doesn't get easier; it gets much harder.
Sure.
And there are ways that the Premier rulebook was much easier to write. But I do think so, and I don't mean to sound like I want like control over every facet. I'd be happy to work on a project.
Oh no, it doesn't sound exactly like that at all, Cole.
It's funny. I have a game I've worked on with my brother called Headset Heroes, which is kind of like about competitive video gaming. And I don't know, maybe it'll see the light of day someday. But we have a friend who's a cartoonist who did gorgeous art for it, and it's been so fun to be kind of like part of a creative team. So I do love that kind of work. But
that's
John
cool.
Company was a personal project, and I kind of wanted to see it through all the paces. And I will say, speaking of rulebook writing, I am prouder of that rulebook than just about any other thing that I've done. It's not quite done yet.
I've played a prototype of it. Now, this is before it had a board, so I'm looking forward. I know a lot of people are really anticipating. So for those that are listening and that are not super familiar, give me high level John Company.
Okay, so John Company is a game about becoming a respectable family in England. So think Jane Austen. You're just trying to make a buck and retire at a fancy house. And you do that by collectively steering this big business. And imagine, in Food Chain Magnate, which is a game that I'm not supposed to compare John Company to, but it was on my mind when I was designing it. You've got a big company with all these little jobs, but instead of all those jobs being controlled by one player, players take turns and they kind of climb the ladder through the company. And it's a game about the shared project of building something, while at the same time, the more respectable families, the ones that have already cashed out, are trying to tear it all down and just burn the bridge as they cross it. So it's not a cooperative game. It's quite competitive, and there's a lot of like kind of weird zany negotiation in it. But essentially, it's a game about running a business together and then running that business into the ground together.
Fantastic. I'm legitimately looking forward to that, and that is supposed to be coming out at Essen this year.
That's right.
If all plays out right.
We are on
right?
schedule.
Good. Per your schedule. Got it. All right. So let's change it up a little bit. So now as you know, we have our Patreon and we have our patrons, and I asked them in our Slack chat the last couple days, hey, y'all got any questions for Cole? I'm going to be, sitting down and talking with him for a bit. And they came up with a pretty good range of questions here. All right. So first off, your 3 published or soon to be published games, they all went to Sierra Madre or Hallenspiele. Is that a conscious decision on your part? Is that you're going to stay with those 2 companies, or are you thinking about branching out, or is that a bridge to be crossed down the road?
So I have thought about it. All the designs that I've done were designed for specific companies. When I pitched, I really wanted Phil, because for the reason I described earlier, I really wanted Phil to publish Premier. So when I designed the cards, I looked at all the Porfiriana cards and was like, what would Phil like? And so everything about the game was built for Phil. John Company was more a game that could have gone a couple different places, but Infamous Traffic was designed for Hallenspiel. That said, I have games for mass. I actually find it really interesting, the issue of designing for a broader audience, and I have designs that I would love to see through to that point. So I have other projects, but I'm not going to pitch Phil like a midweight Euro. I'll go to
sure. Yeah. Keep it specific to what's appropriate
I have
for the
so many projects
publisher.
I want to do for Phil. I will always, I think, have, especially if John Company does okay, I think I will always have a Phil project in the works in some degree. But this is something that I want to explore more. I mean, it isn't my day job. I'm at the very end of a very long graduate school experience. It's been lovely, but I'm looking forward to doing the next thing. And, I have no idea what it's going to be, but I know that no matter what I'm doing, I'm going to want to be designing games.
That I'm excited to hear that, and I'm sure everybody listening will as well. So the unique themes, is that a conscious decision, or is it more or less just with your study in your graduate program and kind of what it is that you're passionate about? Do you specifically latch onto it, or is it just you fall into them?
I don't know. I mean, it is weird that the ones that have published, maybe it's a marketing decision at some deep level. I'm like, what angle can I take? And I find these obscure topics. It's funny. Even I have a very weird Euro game about running a school. It's so strange. It's extra strange because there aren't very many games about running schools, which seems like an obvious theme. All these teachers playing games. Right? Here's a game where competing principal. So yeah, I'm saying this on the air, and I hope that publishers hear it and they think, oh yes, games about schools, we should do that, because I would love to play more of them. I share my ideas freely with anybody. Take it. But I have a game about running a school that it's a kind of, so I guess all of my themes are just offbeat, but I think it's because my interests are a little offbeat. If the subject of the game doesn't animate me, then it just won't get done. So it's all about passion. Yeah, so it's all about finding. I want to find something. When I was an undergrad, when I was in high school, even I would always pick topics to write about that I had no idea what it was. None. I was like, I'm going to write about gender in Hamlet. I have never read a book about gender in Hamlet. And of course, there are tons written, and it was always fun to learn about this stuff. So I tend to pick topics that I don't know very much about. So with Premier, I didn't really know much about the great game. I had read a little bit, but then going to the library, getting the books, kind of sorting through all of that. With the school game, I read a lot about, and it's kind of it's a family game, but I read a lot of books about how schools work. So as long as I can find a theme that I don't know about, it is likely to get my attention. I think that's maybe the governing.
I dig it. I dig it a lot, actually. Always hungry, thirst for knowledge type stuff. I dig it. So do you find, now, seeing as you teach, do you find that game design influences how you teach or vice versa? Or none of the above?
Well, okay. It's funny. The class I'm teaching now has featured no games. It's very serious.
Serious class is serious.
Yeah, it's a serious class. We read hard books in serious class. But I use games when I teach. I used to teach undergraduates research by using Sam Barlow's Her Story, which is an excellent interactive fiction kind of puzzly computer game. I taught a game on debt that used. I played a big. Do you know Stephen Dora's Intrigue?
Yes.
Okay, it's an amazing game. It's one of those games that came out in like the early 2000s or no, the 90s that is just criminally underappreciated because it's brilliant. But I was teaching a game on debt, and what I did is, as an exercise, each player became a piece in the game of Intrigue, and we like set up different chairs because the whole idea is you're trying to send your family members to go get jobs at these different fancy houses. And so the players divide into teams, and they would go and they'd say, all right, if you have multiple applicants, you can only have one doctor. So which one do you pick? And so it's all about favors in a kind of Bonanza-ish sense. But essentially, we played a live-action version of Intrigue, and it worked great as an exercise. So I do use games a lot in my teaching, especially when I teach high schoolers, just because you have a little bit more time. The periods are shorter. With college students, it's a little tricky. But I would say that I'm always thinking about, when I'm designing lessons, if the best way I can get it across is through a game, then like I'm going to use a game. But I don't push for it.
Are there any designers that you look for, either look up to or see as inspiration, or as I use them for ideas, that type thing?
I love Tom Russell's designs. I love them. Northern Pacific, when it came out, was it was just a revelation for me. I had never.
Again, going back to that opaque design, it's so simple.
It's so simple.
It's
so
just simple.
Crushing how simple it is. And then when I played Irish Gauge, I just laughed the entire game. I was so charmed by Irish Gauge. Something about shaking that little cup. It was so fun. And the different way it was like working with its probabilities and the incentive management, I was smitten with that design. And
Irish Gauge is my all-time favorite winsome.
Oh, really? Yeah. So it's amazing. And actually, so I would say the public. So I love Tom's work, and I will always buy the Winsome set. I am waiting for that email. I'm just hitting refresh because I know it's coming any day. And those are games that get played a lot, and I think about a lot, and they kind of anchor my formal concerns. On the less than formal side of things, I will certainly always play Phil's games, just because he has a wide, inquiring mind. And here's the thing: I know people have problems with Phil's politics. Little do they know that like I am in constant email arguments with him. Like I love Phil, but we argue about politics constantly. And I wouldn't trade it for anything, because some of our threads are now years old where we're really just going back and forth. But I'm really interested in the kinds of things that catch Phil's eye. I want to learn about them. Also, I didn't study science, so I really appreciate, what book? I see, and I'm going to forget the title of the book, but because of Genesis, I found myself reading a bunch of books about the origins of life that were way beyond me. But I'm now calling out my brother and asking him to explain like these different theories and everything. So Phil's games always, and then shortly, just a couple other designers that I'm just kind of intrigued by their work. Joel Toppin, even though I don't normally play solo games, exploring Navajo Wars was really wonderful.
And Comanche area.
Yep. And then I'm always interested again, like in Nate Hayden's stuff. There are, Yeah, I don't know. It's the small press stuff I'm attracted to. I usually, I'm sure you have relationships like this where like, oh, you're into games. Like, do you want a game for your birthday? People are always, like, have
good luck trying to find these.
Have you heard of Catan? Yeah. It's amazing. But so I have a general rule where I tell people like, don't buy me games. Like I kind of like know the ones that I'm intrigued by.
Right.
But there's an exception. My brother-in-law has amazing taste, and he will find me these weird indie RPGs that I've never heard about. And so there's one, I can't remember the name of the designer, which is too bad, but there's a game called The Quiet Year, which I just love. It's very weird. It's a game where you have to communicate through drawing on a map. And the way the game is positioned, it's not really about winners or losers or anything, but it's just the game is an organ for dealing with disagreement and experimenting. And I love it. I think it's amazing. And sadly, I think the designer has stopped designing, but I am really interested in her work and will happily seek out those titles. So the weird stuff. Give me the weird stuff.
So noted for Christmas, weird stuff.
Yeah,
got it. Okay. All right. Dream collaboration. Do you have any interest in ever working with somebody on a co-design?
I really want to design a game with my brother. We have always had, and this is kind of a campy answer, but it's true, because when we have a relationship where I am definitely in the designer role and he is definitely in the developer role. So I pitch and he cuts, and I pitch and he cuts. And I would love to work on a project with him where we both get to oscillate our positions a little bit, because I've been talking with my brother Drew about games for, as long as we've been alive. We've been talking about games, and I would love to work deeply with him on a project. Outside of that, I'm sort of interested in working on a digital game. I don't really know what it would be or what it would be like, but there are tons of designers in that space that I'm just intrigued by their work and would love to work on something with them. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Now, the most important question I've asked you the entire day here. All right.
All right.
And this
fire
is
away.
On a personal note, this is me asking you, Cole, this question.
No one is listening.
I've been waiting years for your graphic redesign of Union versus Central. When does the wait end, dude? Come on.
Oh my God. It's funny that you say that, because I very nearly dusted it off recently.
Please.
Okay, so I'll give you good news and bad news. The good news is I could do it very quickly, because I just know a lot more about how those. When I was starting that project, I can't imagine even watching myself doing it. I was doing it in the worst, most wrong-headed way. That is a game where I could write I could put them in a spreadsheet. I could do a data merge. We could have the decks with a
real
few
quick
weeks.
For the people listening at home, it's the most just wrong game in the world. It is 18xx, the card game that can take upwards of 16 hours to play. It's a 2-player only game. It's just absolutely insane.
Well, and it is Roads and Boats, the card game. Also that. So it has their train elements, but I find it somehow takes the torturous decisions about logistics in Roads and Boats and has the same gravity, but it's on a single line. It's amazing. And I love it, and I still play it. And I did part of this. I started this redraw, and then I realized how many cards there was, and then the semester got crazy, and I had to write all this stuff. And it's just sat there, and I really want to do it. And I feel like I can do it, and it's on the agenda. The problem is I have emailed the people who I would need to email, and they have not been that responsive to actually taking it. But I think the way for me to do it is to do the project, to pitch it to certain publishers I have in mind, and then to have them go to Winsome, because I would love to see that game get a little dressed up republished, because I do think it's brilliant. And I think that even though it can be 16 hours, the 2-hour game is lovely. All the smaller versions work. It scales great. The rules are simple. Oh, it needs wider distribution, like so many other Winsomes.
I agree, and it would sell dozens of copies.
Oh yeah, at the right face. So I would love to do that, and I would love to just help. So speaking of dream collaborations, I would love to do a train game for Winsome with any of the people on their staff. I would be so down. I wish I had that tenacity to do something that simple. But the bad news about it is I acquired a few months ago a first edition copy of Lords of the Sierra Madre. Now, Lords of the Sierra Madre is a tricky game.
Priorities, Cole.
This is important though, because the second edition is fine, but the first edition there is an insanity to it. It is this Oregon Trail. Every hex is 10 miles of Mexico. It's this completely insane thing, and I really want to do a comprehensive redraw. And
I would highly encourage that after Union versus Central.
Yeah, I just feel like it's the kind of thing that I want people to play this weird. It's Phil's first game, and it doesn't exist. I looked for that game for 8 years before I found a copy of it, which is my record for Grail games. And when I say copy, I mean one of those 80s office envelopes stuffed with paper, just printer paper, and then a little letter that Phil wrote in 1989 saying I hope you enjoy this copy. So it's a very hard to find item that I just want more people to be able to see it and work through it because it's so charming and interesting. So that project is slightly higher priority, but maybe I'll revisit Union versus Central because that game does need it.
You keep threatening. You keep threatening for years to do this. I've been waiting. I've been patient, Cole.
Yeah, and it is a game that I think would do quite well.
Cool. All right, that's all I got, man. So this little 45-minute hoo-yah became an hour and a half, and I'll be honest, we might actually just make this the next episode. We were actually going to team this up with an Infamous Traffic, but I think this is interesting enough for folks at home that I'm not going to mess with it. I think Amanda's going to take care of it, and here we are. So,
I had a great time. Thanks a lot. This was a real blast.
Yeah, this was really cool. Really appreciate it, and super excited about John Company, man.
All right.
Thank
you very much for having me on. I love your podcast.
I appreciate that. It's very kind of you to say. So good luck also on the Golden Elephant Award that will be announced at the end of May during HeavyCon, which you need to come to once you're done with school.
Yes.
And yeah, man, thanks a lot for doing this. And we'll be in touch. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good, Edward.
All right. Take care, Cole.
Right,
thanks.
See ya.
That's pretty cool, huh?
It really, really was.
Thanks a bunch to Cole for taking the time, and I gotta say, really looking forward to John Company.
I am too.
So Essen, oh hey, wait, we'll be there. Can't wait. Pick up a copy there.
Oh yeah.
So that's all we got for this week. We will catch y'all next week, yeah?
Yes, we will, absolutely.
With another show.
And in the meantime, check out heavycardboard.com/live for all of our live streams and stuff.
Promise. Next week, we'll be back with a new show.
Promise.
And, related to board games in some form or fashion.
Promise.
We promise.
We really promise. Bye, guys.
Later.